officers, to be law enforcement, counselor, mediator, mental health professional, and many other inherited duties as first responders and really problem solvers. So the discussion we know is complex, it is multi-layered, and one that requires significant care and consideration. So for the past several weeks, we've been listening to the feedback from our community, lots of feedback, and discussing how to wrap those perspectives into healthy growth for our community. So the mayor's office, the city council, and the police chief have established a set of tenets for that discussion to continue productively and result in meaningful advancements for our community. There are 24 tenets that will establish really the framework and ground rules for that discussion to happen. So I'm excited to be working with the council president, Councilmember Kinnear, and the chief on this important discussion. And we also look forward to having announcements on how we're advancing that conversation in the coming weeks. So at this time, I'd like to now turn it over to Council President Bates.
Thank you, Mayor Woodward, and for you and your team of meeting with council members and community members. I just want people to know that City Council has been listening to our community. Our community has rightfully been insisting on real change and progress going forward, like much of the nation, and particularly addressing racism and implicit bias in our criminal justice system. And it's no longer enough to not be contributing the problem. It's important to be anti-racist and anti-bias and move things forward systemically. Council early on, I want to say about 6 weeks ago, published 29 potential reform topics. And we put that out there and we've got feedback. And when I say council, really, mostly they were mine. I don't want to speak for the rest of council, but they definitely allowed it to be on the agenda and to discuss. But as I met with Chief Meidel and City Administrator Wes Crago and the mayor, I became convinced that the best way to achieve those 29 reforms is through courageous conversation. I just think that is the way to go. And what I'm imagining is that we will have a table much like this with community reform leaders and people with lived experience and with police leadership and council and mayor and with a facilitator. We'll sit down and we'll just go through all of these things and do some deep listening instead of talking past each other. I think that's the quickest way to achieve the reforms people want to do, and I'm putting my full support with that. These tenets are some principles that will assist that, and they will be further added to once we get the group at the table so that everyone really has a buy-in. So I'm super excited. It seems like a path forward that no other big city that I've seen is doing, and Spokane leads, as I often say, and I'm excited about it. And I want to turn it over to Councilmember Kinnear, who's our public safety chair and has been doing this work for years. Councilmember Kinnear.
Thank you. This is a first for me doing a press conference via WebEx, so new experience. Thank you, Council President. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, the mayor, the police chief, and most importantly, the leaders in our Indigenous, Black, and Hispanic communities. This time in our history is pivotal. It's vital we bring the thoughts and concerns of these communities to the forefront to shape safe and non-biased criminal justice reform. This is a difficult conversation for many reasons and requires collaboration and consideration of all viewpoints. Communities of color are the most impacted by any criminal justice reform that occurs. And that's why I recognize and share the urgency with you. Once the council has read over and deliberated, I want to give this discussion the time it requires to have a lasting and positive impact for our community. Additionally, the council has been advocating for diversity in hiring for about 6 years now, and we are glad that this administration is helping us with this and hope to see it occur in our police department to reflect the community we all serve. And Spokane has always come together in difficult times. Now we have that opportunity again to lead with how we treat each other. And as difficult as it was for me to read and process the thousands of emails, and we literally got thousands of emails on reform, I appreciate the feedback because it means we'll reach a better outcome For generations, we've heard that Lady Justice is blind. Moreover, we know that many times Lady Justice lowers her blindfold to see who's standing in front of her. Well, now's the time to make that blindfold secure and treat all of our citizens with the respect and dignity they deserve. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Chief Meidel now.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kinnear, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. As the Spokane Police Department has a strong history of continuous learning, and we're committed to improving our ability to serve the community as a national policing model. We have routinely in the past collaborated with community groups, academic institutions, and other organizations to make sure that we're at the forefront of the best and safest policing practices. Safety is going to be at the center of all of our efforts. Safety for the community, the people we encounter, and also safety for our officers. Working together collaboratively, there's another opportunity for our department to learn, to grow, and to reaffirm our commitment to excellence in policing, increasing the safety and the security of our community, as well as building partnerships. So we are looking forward for the opportunity to work together towards an outcome that's in the best interest of the community and those that are involved in the justice system as well. And with that, we will go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Hello, this is Mayor Kawash with KXOI News. So this is essentially serving as the base for real change and reform. What are some of these principles that you guys are trying to kind of stem off of here?
Are you talking about the tenants, Mayor, that we're agreeing to?
Yeah, that.
There's about 24 of them, and you'll be getting a news release on those. I can go through all 24, or you can wait for the release, but I think it provides a really good framework for us having these discussions moving forward. But just basically, it's about respect and being honest and being able to build trust, courageousness, accountability, safety, transparency, all those things. But there are 24 of them that we agreed to that set the ground rules for how we're going to have some honest and some, quite frankly, some tough discussions.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
Sorry, and I know these discussions have been going on as we've seen these protests. Why now? What happened now where you guys are announcing these tenets at this moment?
Well, I would just say that even before the protests, we have been having these conversations. But many of us were at the protest and listening to people and then talking with people who work as police officers, and we've had a lot of conversations. But the challenge always is, we can start having these conversations in a conference room like this, but if we don't really open it up and include the people who are most impacted and who are part of it, it's just very unsatisfactory and not very effective. And so we just started talking a few weeks ago about how would we do that? And we could bring in a facilitator and we could get people to come to the table, and these tenets are a good start, but it'll be up to the people who come to the table to bring their knowledge and wisdom as well, if there are ones that are missing, or there may be some language. But the idea is that we would all buy in to listening to each other and having a communication with a goal, an overarching goal of making positive change and improving things, building on changes we've already made over the years in Spokane, but not being content with how it is.
Hey, it's Casey with CREM. Question here. You mentioned that these discussions have been going on for months, and it certainly seems that a lot of people have made their voices heard through these protests and through other conversations. So, at what point does it no longer become enough to sit down and talk? At what point is there going to be some form of action?
I think that's a good question. I think though there needs to be time spent listening, and that's really what we've seen we've seen conversations in the community for the last 2 months, and for elected officials to listen to the constituents outside of even the protests. So I think you have to invest that time of listening and even learning before you start taking actionable steps. And I think it needs to be very thoughtful, and I think it needs to be very considerate. So that's where we are. We're in a place where we have had discussions We've had discussions with our own constituents, leaders of communities of color. And so now we're at a place where, okay, so where do we take the conversation and what do we do with that? How do we get to the actionable items that this community wants to see? And so we're going to start having that conversation as the stakeholders to make that happen.
Yeah, the other thing I would just like to mention is, it's not ready today, but we have been working on a document that have all those specifics that we raised earlier, and figures out which of those can we implement right away, which are going to probably get implemented, but take some more conversation, and what are the hard ones where there's not a lot of common ground necessarily, and how do we have that conversation? Council just got the draft of that last night, so they are circulating and thinking about it. But I'm imagining just in the next very, very short time, couple weeks, that document with all those specifics that people really want to see. They're hungry to see specifics in action. So yes, we've been listening, we're going to do more listening, but it won't be an absence of very specific things. We just don't have it yet today. We need to circulate it a little bit further, but that's coming soon.
And that's something we've been working on for several weeks.
Yeah. There was surprising to me, of the 29 things, there's surprisingly a lot of common ground.
Yep.
The question from the chat box, the question is, what role will the police guild have in this conversation?
I personally hope that they will join in on the conversation. We can't make them join the conversation, because that'd be a violation of labor law to force them to be part of the conversation. But for it to be really effective, you really have to have people with lived experiences in the justice system, regardless of the role they have, talking and most importantly, listening to each other. And if they are, it's going to be more effective. As a council member, and I'm sure the mayor is the same, we listen to officers and we hear what their experiences are, and then we listen to community members and their experiences. And one of the things we're trying to break out of is, instead of it going through us, those conversations, is doing it in the same room so everybody can hear everybody.
I would like to echo what council member or council president just said, Lori Kinnear here, that I've been receiving phone calls from just the boots on the ground, the officers wanting to reach out and say, I want to talk to you about my concerns. And I think that's really important that we listen to them as well, because they're the ones that are actually out there in the field doing the work. And hopefully Mayor will be supportive of that, so that it's not just the guild executive board that's at the table, but the people who are actually out there doing the work as well.
Absolutely, Councilwoman Kinnear. I mean, I've engaged with our police officers on the streets. I've done, just in the last month, 3 ride-alongs, addressed every roll call, talked to officers. So yeah, we absolutely have to have that experience and insight as well for this to be meaningful.
Question from KHQ for probably the mayor, possibly council president. What kind of accountability will there be?
Accountability in the process of reform?
Well, let's say an officer or a law enforcement officer is not supportive or effective. What kind of accountability will there be to ensure that these tenets are met?
Well, the tenets are for the conversation. The reform would be for the police department. Craig Meidel, I think the chief, can talk about accountability, because he is trying to, and has done great work in changing the department in the 4 years that he has headed SPD, and the type of accountability that he has for his officers. So maybe the chief would like to talk to about that.
Absolutely, thank you. So yeah, some of the again, the prongs, the elements aren't yet ready to be released, but some of the prongs that you'll see in this when it is released are going to be a lot of the postings, the transparency, more data sharing, more data collection as well. So in terms of accountability with that, that's in essence, that's going to be an information gathering piece that will provide more transparency to the community of what SPD is doing, who they're contacting, how they're contacting them. In terms of resolutions that end up leading to policies, procedures, and training, you know, the accountability comes down to basically you follow the policy. We have the policy for that. If a policy is not followed, then we follow the principle of progressive discipline. So that's the accountability will be the same as the accountability it's been, you know, my entire tenure as a police officer at the department.
This is Mayor here again. So we just got that email from you guys with the tenants out there. So they're a little bit vague. What do you guys kind of see coming out of this specifically? How does this serve as the start to real police reform?
Well, this is setting the context for the conversation. So the next document you'll get won't be today, but you'll see a list of all the specific potential reforms out there. They'll be worded a little more neutrally than the potential resolution of our 29 points that council discussed. But this will be the framework for having the conversation about it, whether you want to talk about releasing internal affairs reports, whether you want to talk about use of force. The idea is to have conversations around that using these language. So this is not substantive other than really to say these are the ways we want to talk about it. And I think always challenging in policing, differently than the military, is that we as a community hire law enforcement people to serve and protect us all, the entire community. And they get told what the policies and they get trained a certain way. And then sometimes there's a misalignment there, what the community wants. And then the officers get caught in the middle and community members get caught in the middle of that. And so we're trying to get more alignment. And I just think having a conversation with these kind of tenants as the context will support that.
And I would just add, I think it's pretty specific. I mean, there's 24 tenants here with very much specific guidelines around each one and setting the framework for this conversation. So I think we've covered most of the bases, and I don't see a lot of vagueness there.
Yeah, this is Adam with the Spokesman Review. I'm just wondering, there was some substantial overlap between the council proposal and the mayor's proposal. Why haven't we seen just immediate action on what is agreed upon already? And then I'm wondering if you can articulate what you expect the more challenging pieces to be and to negotiate.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get into specifics today, Adam, but that's something that we're going to start talking about specifically in the weeks to come. This opportunity for us to talk to you on this day was to let you know that those conversations are ongoing and will include more stakeholders as we move forward. We have had some work and some progress in the last few weeks, but in order to move forward, we need to invite far more stakeholders to discuss the kinds of changes, healthy changes we want to see in our community and in our policing.
I would just add that I think you're going to be seeing a list of the overlap soon. It's just that the process and the negotiations between myself and the mayor's office, it was a very small group, and now we have shared it with council members. We really want to give them a chance to weigh in and see it, so and react, and they'll improve it just with their feedback from their own knowledge and their constituents. So it's just a little bit of a timing thing to get that out there. And I want to make it clear that once we have those agreed upon things out there, we will start pursuing implementation right away on those in a measured way, parallel with the conversation about the bigger ones. And I'm not going to really call out the specifics of the bigger ones, but I will just say that it reflects the same debates that you hear in the community, we get in our emails. Most of the most specific contentious issues are the use of force and tactics, specific ones, when and what type. So those are the ones that are more challenging, but even those, not to get specific, we've already started conversations I have with police officers in leadership about, well, hey, maybe there is a little more middle ground there than we thought. And when we were just in the mode of hey, here's the 29 things, council's maybe gonna pass them and start putting ordinances in. And the academy, the police training academy was doing press conferences on specific things to sort of counteract a little bit. Now it's totally changed. We're not so polarized. It's like, oh, where is that sweet spot that we can maintain safety and protect all people to the best of our ability? So I'm pretty hopeful about it.
Casey again, if I could, so what's the mechanism for this conversation going to be given the pandemic? Is it going to be every stakeholder jumps in on one big Zoom call? Will it be mayor one-on-one with certain people like you've been doing? Like, what's the logistics of this going to be?
We don't know. We'd rather have it in person, but if we're not able to, but I think it's going to be super important that everybody's listening to everybody. So it'll be a group. Ideally, we will have a facilitator who's skilled in facilitation and also is knowledgeable about these issues. But yeah, it'd be much better to be in person. But I don't think we want to wait until we could do it in person. So we'll just get started as best we can.
So 2 questions from the chat box. The first is there a city or county that is doing this right that Spokane is looking to for examples or ideas? Like any of the electeds or chief as well that you've heard from or seen other places where you thought there's been a good approach to this?
So, not much, right? I think what you're seeing here really is an agreement to sit down collaboratively between the mayor's office and the city council. You have 2 branches agreeing that we're going to sit down and work through these issues. We're going to agree on the ones we can. We're going to compromise on the ones we can't. And then we're going to just have honest discussions where we just absolutely aren't necessarily agreeing with each other, but we're going to do it respectfully. And we want to also acknowledge the views of all of the parties as well. So from what I'm seeing out there, if there are other agencies, there's not many, and we're one of the few that are doing this.
I would echo the chief's comment. I personally haven't seen any city that's doing this, but I think Spokane is a leader in many ways and will be on this issue in the way that we are doing it as well, by coming together, working in unity, not hashing and battling this issue out in public, like we see in many cities between mayor's offices and city council. That's what leadership is. Leadership is bringing the stakeholders together, having tough conversations, and in unity coming up with changes, reforms that we can all agree on. And that is much easier for our department to implement and much better for our community as a whole.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything. We're not modeling off of anything. I'm very active in the Association of Washington Cities, and so I meet with lots of representatives of other cities in Washington, and we're having the same debate within that group. Different cities have different perspectives, but everyone agrees it's a big issue and it needs to be handled. And I think the challenge is to bring an urgency to it. I just think too many people who have suffered under a system that doesn't work well for them for too long are just not willing to wait and just, let's just talk some more and maybe it'll get better. So there has to be an urgency. And what I've been impressed with is with our police chief and the leadership and the mayor and the mayor's office is that they share council's urgency for that too. And that's the way this will work is for people to listen to each other, which I don't think happens many places, with an urgency. So it has to be both. And I'm frankly happy that we're as far along as we are, given how other cities are. It's way too overdue, but all we can do now is move forward. And so I'm excited to work with people to do that.
From KHQ again, is there a timeline for this, these reforms?
Not really. I would say I'm hopeful that I would say by the end of the month, I'm hopeful that we will have a timeline, but we don't today. And some people have asked me, well, why are we even having this press conference today? And the reason from my perspective is that, you know, we had a lot of intense community conversation in the end of May and throughout June. And people keep going, okay, well, what's going to happen? We're not hearing anything. And so I think we wanted to come to the public and say, no, we've been working on it, and we want to invite more people into the conversation. It's council members, it's community members, people who have been arrested, people who have made arrests. We want to invite those people into the conversation and let them know that's the direction we're heading, so that you can give us feedback. And then, you know, we can't actually have the entire city around this table, but we'll get representative people from each perspective so that no one can say that a particular voice wasn't heard on behalf of a particular community.
If I do want to take, if I'm somebody watching this and I want to take part, what's the best way to get in touch with somebody?
You certainly email myself. I'm kind of lead on it for council. And so, yeah.
And feel free to email the mayor's office.
Yeah.
One more question from the chat box. The sheriff has announced an agreement with the NAACP to hire an outside group to help them do an internal review, including the department's arrest statistics related to arrests of people of color and policies. Is this related to that? Should it merge with that? How can the two work together?
I think this is a good question for the chief.
All right, thank you. So if you recall, when the former chief was here, he worked with Eastern Washington University to look at the department's self-initiated activities with communities, specifically community of colors, right? So if an officer gets a call for service, they're required to go regardless of the demographics. What the chief wanted to look at, and what's important to look at, okay, when you're not called and you're engaging in self-initiated activity and you're making the decision to engage without it being a call, what type of people are you engaging and what does that engagement look like? So Dr. Burns did a pretty thorough study. They actually had two different data sets that they studied. One was a little bit longer in duration to get a bigger data set. That final report was presented to the city council several years ago with a suggestion, you know, this should be followed up on. There's a lot of work to do here, and there's also a lot of unanswered questions. We have the what, but the why was not answered. So about 2 years ago, I reached out to Kurt Robinson, president of the NAACP, and I told him, hey, I want to put together a committee again and start looking at this and figuring out the next steps. In the process of doing that, I came into contact with a gentleman named Bob Scales. Bob Scales runs a company called Police Strategies, and some of you may be familiar with Bob. His company is the foundation or the business that has come up with the Ombudsman's Use of Force dashboard. So I contacted him. He does this type of work nationwide, and I didn't want to necessarily just focus on self-initiated. I wanted that piece as well, but there's other pieces of the pie that I wanted to look at, including uses of force. So last month I spoke with Bob. I asked if they would be willing to do a similar study, but instead of that one slice of pie of self-initiated activity, I asked him to look at several more slices. So he is in the process of wrapping up his initial report. That will be an initial report. There is more data within that we can mine even further once we get that initial report as well. So in terms of us reviewing that, it's something that we have done multiple times. We're not going to do a fresh look at it again with Police Strategies.
Chief, Matt, one more question for you going off of that. So as we wait for kind of more specific reforms here, what is the police department doing to kind of enact some of these basic tenets here, like compassion and leadership? What's changing there?
So that's a good question. So if you look at the history of the Spokane Police Department, we have continuously worked with other organizations. So if you go back 8 years ago, we had the Use of Force Commission Board. So this commission looked at our use of force and came up with a series of recommendations. I believe it was something like 24. And that took about a year or two of working through the Use of Force Commission. And then several years after that, we worked with the Department of Justice Collaborative Reform to look at our uses of force, our policies, what kind of training are we implementing. So that was the Department of Justice Collaborative Reform Project. 2 years after that report came out, and mind you, the vast majority of chiefs and sheriffs would look at the Department of Justice Collaborative Reform as the gold standard. And after about 2 years, I was looking around at what was going on in the rest of the nation. So I said, we are going to take a fresh look at our use of force policy. Pretty unusual, especially on such a close heels of the DOJ coming out with their report. So we looked at our use of force, we updated our use of force policy. We also created a separate de-escalation policy. We changed how we do pursuits. We changed the sanctity of life, the duty to de-escalate, to intervene. So we haven't sat around waiting. We didn't wait for 2020 to come along. It's something that we've continuously done. It's something that we will continuously do. And I think the evidence of that would be the fact, reaching out to Bob Schelds as well to say, let's do a more comprehensive review than the prior one we had through Eastern as well. So we're always looking around, we're always reviewing, and we're just going to continue doing that.
This is Brian. I just want to weigh in. I was really excited to read the news about the sheriff joining in that process and working with the NAACP. I think there's a lot of opportunity to work together on that. And they kept it under wraps for a while, and I think they wanted to get the work done first and not just trumpet that they had the agreement. So I appreciate them doing the work. They're also working with Dr. Burns from EWU on that same thing. So I think there is, but I haven't had the conversation with the sheriff on it, but I think other people in the city have, and we will look towards that because, we police ourselves throughout the whole county, and people don't just stay within the borders of it. So, and we're also looking, I think the city council has been super interested, and the mayor's office is joining us in the whole criminal justice system, not just the policing. That's just the front end of it. There's all this other stuff that goes on, and we're going towards that. And again, I think Spokane City and county are leaders statewide on that. And we just want to go faster and be better.
Any final questions? Councilor Kinnear, any final thoughts that you wanted to add? Okay.
No.
Council President,
All right.
Mayor, anything else you want to add?
No, I just look forward to being able to talk with you in the next few weeks on what those agreement points are, and we will begin some very important conversations for our community as far as making our community grow and make it healthier, and look forward to having that conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.